as we saw there up on the screen, those Apple shares are flagging a little bit because of some concerns around margins. You took the opportunity to actually upgrade the stock because you were really wowed by those numbers, right, and by the forecast. I'm curious how worried you are about the margin issue. Obviously not worried enough to not upgrade the stock.
Yeah. So when we look at the March quarter as a starting point, despite supply constraints and despite potential inflation as it pertains to memory, Apple guided to 13 to 16% revenue growth and a very healthy gross margin of 48 to 49%. Now, the company does not provide an outlook beyond the next quarter. So I do think that there is potential that the higher memory prices could affect Apple and could affect the margins. But I would say working in its favor is that Tim Cook is excellent at managing supply chain, and with the very surprisingly strong demand for the iPhone 17 lineup, there could be an opportunity to take price. So I'm a lot less concerned about the margin outlook for the second half of this year for those reasons.
Okay, Tom, I actually want to play what Tim Cook had to say about the memory chip pricing issue on the call. Let's play that.
Memory had a minimal impact on the Q1, so the December quarter gross margin. We do expect it to be a bit more of an impact to the Q2 gross margin. We do continue to see market pricing for memory increasing significantly. As always, we'll look at a range of options to deal with that.
So I guess the question is, what does that range of options include, Tom? And for example, do you think that that Apple's going to raise iPhone prices this year?
Yeah. So again, I think that the surprise, at least to me, was how strong the iPhone lineup has performed, despite Apple really having a substandard AI solution. So I actually think that's very bullish coming out of the quarter. And because of the strength of the demand, I think it does have pricing power. The other potential advantage would be for memory prices to come down later this year. And then again, I think that the strength in managing the supply chain is why I'm less concerned than maybe the market is by the flattish performance of the stock, despite the blowout quarter and excellent outlook for the March quarter.
You and I have talked about the AI story, or lack thereof, with Apple before. And as we've talked about, our tech editor, Dan Halley, says he's not convinced that people are going to buy an iPhone because of the AI, just like they weren't buying it because of Siri, for example. I know you feel a little bit differently about that. Do you think that Apple is starting to make some more significant progress on that front?
So first off, I think that the strategic partnership with Google essentially de-risks AI for Apple as it relates to investors' concerns about it. Now, what's going to sound strange view here is that I think that being slow to have an AI product is actually working in Apple's favor, because I think you're seeing a lot of consumers recognize that there's, for example, a lot of hallucinations going on, and that some of the other companies that have AI products on the market today, those products aren't necessarily perfect, and in many cases are flawed. So I actually think that and again, I didn't think it would play out this way at all, but the being slow to market with AI, actually I think it has worked in Apple's favor. But the good news is, and yes, I'm skeptical like Dan, that Siri is going to be materially better when enhanced with AI. But I do think that over time, I expect Apple to at least be at par with the market when it comes to consumer services related to AI.
Tom, kind of to your point about the delay, have we figured out what the killer app is in terms of AI usefulness on the phone?
So it seems like, so I also wonder, Julie, about the OpenAI ability to generate a profitable business from AI. So stepping back and just looking at AI at the industry level rather than Apple specific. So I think it's unclear. If you look at Meta platforms, they're clearly benefiting from using artificial intelligence to improve the relevancy of their advertising and improve their digital advertising effort. But that would be more of a, I guess, a commercial solution for AI than necessarily one as a consumer. There's a lot of usage as it relates to search, but I anecdotally feel that Gemini isn't necessarily materially better than what I see from the legacy search results from Google and things of that nature. So yeah, I think again, it's unclear to me what the killer consumer app is as it pertains to AI, and I think that's benefiting Apple in being slow to market.
And you know, obviously, we've seen yet more headlines on OpenAI. Amazon, for example, reportedly considering an investment in the company. You know, as you think about that sort of ecosystem, if you will, Tom, are there other interesting investing opportunities at that point, especially since we've seen a little bit of a wavering in the AI investment enthusiasm so far this year, seemingly among investors?
Well, what I like, Julie, is I feel like investors are being thoughtful in saying, where's the return on the investment spend? And I want to get more comfortable that there is going to be a return on the investment spend because the level of investment spending is just enormous. And then I guess the good news or bad news of having covered the internet since '96 is it reminds me of your company, so Yahoo, the early days of the internet, when it had a disproportionate amount of advertising revenue from startups. And I worry that Amazon, companies that I don't cover like Oracle and Microsoft, are over dependent on OpenAI to the extent that this is still a startup, a very highly valued one. But again, they haven't figured out what their long-term business model is and if they could generate a profit. So I guess my concern for AI is that we'll go with Amazon, that it may be over dependent on some of these startups when it comes to either cloud computing revenue or things of that nature. So that's the risk that I'm trying to monitor.
And I guess Apple is not as levered to some of those things, interestingly. Tom, thank you so much. It's great to see you.
You too. Thank you.
The iPhone revenue climbing 23% year over year to an all-time record of more than $85 billion. Let's talk more about it in the tech landscape more broadly. Joining me now, tech editor Dan Howley and Paul Makes, Freedom Capital Markets Managing Director. I just saw those shares are a little bit higher now, which is a turnaround. Dan, you were tracking those numbers as they were coming out. Now that you've had a little time to percolate, to simmer, for the numbers to simmer, what are your top takeaways, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, explosive iPhone revenue, right? Just out of control, blew away. The estimate said 85.3 billion was the number that came in for iPhone revenue itself. The expectation was for 78.3 billion. The prior first quarter last year, that was 69.1 billion. So just a huge year-over-year jump and easily outstripping estimates. Also beat on the top and bottom line. Revenue about for services just came in line at 30 billion. So, a big quarter for the iPhone. However, that also is playing into the future quarters for Apple because now they're actually constrained when it comes to chips that they put into the iPhone, those nodes that they put in, the packaging that they do for those high-end chips for the phones themselves. And so Tim Cook was saying on the phone call, basically, look, we're trying to do what we can, but we had seen such intense demand, more so than we expected, that it's going to impact supply going forward. And then, on top of that, remember that little memory thing we've been talking about, just a small global shortage. Well, that's now coming into play with Apple. And so for them, Cook was talking about how it's likely to impact margins going forward. Now, they said that margins would be about the same for Q2 as they were in Q1, and that's not necessarily a bad thing for them. However, he did point out that it could be a bigger problem going forward. And so that's where people are going to have to look because the supply of memory is incredibly constricted right now. It's basically just going to the highest bidder. And it's not going to change anytime soon because of this huge AI data center build out. And you can say, well, can't companies just stand up new factories? you know how long it takes to build a factory?
Right.
A little bit of time.
Yeah, most definitely. So, Paul, there's nobody bigger than Apple, right? I mean, I guess NVIDIA on the data center side, but are you confident that Apple will be able to navigate some of this memory chip pricing pressure? Will they raise prices? Will they have other levers? What do you think?
They definitely, given their heft, have buyer's power. If you're to take a look at Harvard Business School professor Michael Porter's rubric. But I would tell you, these are some tactical challenges. But I think the bigger strategic challenges here are one, Apple, despite pretty subdued overall revenue growth the last couple of years, and maybe a little bit higher EPS growth because you have consistent stock buybacks. This has not been a fast growth company, and yet, it's trading even after I boost my EPS today for the out year at 29 times earnings. And they've had a nice resurgence with iPhone sales each of the last 2 quarters, and they have really impressed me with that. But overall, expensive stock. And so I think the stock had run into the quarter. And, there's still going to be, on a strategic basis, a lot of concern about what are they going to do and how are they going to monetize AI. So they do have some tactical short-term issues like the rest of the semiconductor, particularly with memory shortage and memory pricing. But I think those two strategic issues that I just mentioned are a bigger gate on the stock.
And just quickly on that front, Dan, they have made a couple recent moves on that in terms of partnership with Google and also an acquisition. What's the sort of thinking there on how that's going to move the needle?
Yeah, it was a QAI was that acquisition. I believe the information said that it was around $2 billion. So, a relatively large acquisition for Apple here. It's the second largest after Beats. This isn't something, though, that's necessarily going to go into, their overall AI plan. It seems as though this is going to be something that perhaps allows you to use AI in some way with regards to wearables, perhaps with the AirPods or, a smart glass thing that they're working on. And Cook had talked about the Google kind of tie up here. This isn't the first time that they've worked with Google. Usually they're on the money receiving side because they use Google search as the default for the phones when it comes to the actual spotlight search, things like that, Safari. That's been a huge benefit for Google, but now Apple is leaning on them for the AI models. And so he wouldn't go into too much detail at all. And some of the analysts were trying to wriggle something out of him, but they couldn't get him to crack. But it does seem as though, it's a good direction for them when it comes to the AI itself. And this could just be a stopgap measure, right? Until they're able to get their own in-house models together and then implement them in some kind of, software setup. But, at this point, I still very much believe that nobody is going to buy an iPhone because of Apple Intelligence. They're buying these new phones because of the cameras, the kind of redesign, the fact that we're circling COVID, 6 years on just about. People are getting new phones, and the batteries are great in them. So it's I think more to do with the actual phones themselves. I've said this before. Nobody went out originally and said, "Boy, I can't wait to get that Siri in my phone." They were like, "Oh, that phone has a better camera. Let me go get that."
Or they just needed a new phone because we all need these things now because they're integrated, inextricably in our lives for good and for ill. Speaking of AI, though, I do want to move on and I got to ask you, Paul, about these reports that Amazon is in talks to invest $50 billion in OpenAI. So, I mean, it feels almost like another day, another one of these investments. We haven't had as many this year. So what do you make of that?
I really hope it happens because I formerly cover the neo clouds and other AI infrastructure builders. And it is critical, whether it through be a big private round or even an IPO later in 26, that OpenAI raises equity, and a lot of it. Because so much of this ecosystem, Julie, is dependent upon the spending intentions of OpenAI, 1.4 trillion in only 4 years. well, they're going to need to raise a lot of equity. So I hope this happens. I think the recent equity raise, which was very successful by Anthropic, makes me feel better about it. But I hope this works because, man, a lot of folks are dependent on OpenAI raising equity.
So this is interesting, though, that you say you hope it happens for the sake of OpenAI and the neo clouds, not necessarily for Amazon. I mean, is this a good idea for Amazon to be doing?
I think so. It depends on the terms, right? That's always the details. But do they lock in Amazon Web Services capacity? Do they have another opportunity, even besides that, working with OpenAI to monetize their own AI intentions? I would think that it could be a good deal for both sides, but I think it's particularly important for OpenAI.
Dan Ives, coming to you. Apple, you like this quarter?
Look, it was a phenomenal quarter. I mean, if you think about what we saw specifically with iPhone in China, I mean, that was robust tailwind, services strong. Look, but I think the issue with the stock, I mean, investors, it's all about AI. Investors want to see what the strategy is, what the monetization. Obviously, it's Cook keeping it, sort of close to the vest. But I think that ultimately is really going to be the key to why, we're bullish. And I think what you see is this is almost a sleepy, sort of pretty massive upgrade cycle that's taken place.
Dan, are you in a Wedbush office? I've never seen you in the office before. It's a lot for me to take in, Dan.
Look, there's a lot going on, Taz. I had to, I wanted to kind of blow your mind. So I'm in the office today. And, again, it's Friday. Who knew?
Well, count my mind is blown. Melissa, over to you. Dan brings up a good point, talking AI and Apple. How much AI initiatives for Apple, AI, the broader environment, how much of that is priced into Apple stock, you think?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. First of all, happy Friday. Thanks for having me on. I mean, there's a couple of interesting things going on from the quarter. I mean, they beat Visible Alpha consensus on the top line pretty nicely and also with the gross margin. But what really stood out to us was China. China beat consensus by over 20%. So I think, when we think about AI and we think about the second half, the question's going to be is what is going to be the catalyst for those numbers? What's going to drive top line? What's going to drive further upside in the gross margin? Is China going to be sustainable? And are they going to pull something magical out of their hat in the second half around AI?
Is that magical thing, Inez, you think it's this Google Gemini? I mean, Big Tim, he didn't want to get into the financial ramifications of this type of Google, but I mean, it's hard to tell how excited he was. That's just Tim Cook, but he sure seemed excited, and he sure seemed to think this could be a big lift to Apple over time.
Yeah, and it may be the perfect partnership for them, at least for the time being, and them having such a massive quarter. This could give them the runway, so to speak, for a even broader AI strategy later on. So even though investors were so concerned about AI last year, this could be a stopgap measure, as Dan Howley had been mentioning earlier, and this could be the perfect fit for right now. I thought that what was interesting was the memory comment on the earnings call, because that seems to be sort of a bifurcation that we're seeing now in the market with respect to some of these memory names that have been skyrocketing and the demand, the bottleneck when it comes to memory.
Melissa, what really impressed me with Apple, a lot of things, the iPhone revenue, but Tim Cook got on that earnings call and he said, you know what, we're going to drive higher margins in the first quarter, higher than the street expected, even with these memory price these higher memory prices, these memory chip complaints. Isn't that the ultimate buy signal on Apple?
I mean, ultimately what was a surprise was the gross margin, especially coming into the outlook. I mean, they guided 48-49% gross margin. Visible Alpha consensus was 47.5, and we're currently at 47.5 for the second half. So that's what the market has priced in. So as my other two guests alluded to around memory, this is the question. Is Tim Cook going to be able to manage the supply chain and memory prices in a way that enables them to maintain and sustain those 48-49% gross margins, or is the 47.5% the real number?
And as I promised, I'm going to get you on precious metals in a second. Hold on just a moment. Dan, while we're cheering Apple here, Google's going to report soon, probably a good quarter for them. I'm going to talk up Gemini. On the other side, this move lower in software stocks, SAP, Salesforce, ServiceNow. This has been abysmal. Do you try to pick a bottom here, or do you just stay with the winners like an Apple and a Google?
Look, software, it's a guilty till proven innocent. And I think ServiceNow and obviously Microsoft and others, this is just on the street right now. It's almost a do not enter zone. Now, I think a lot of that maybe is overdone specifically for some of the cybersecurity names, for even Salesforce and others. Look, it comes down to monetization phase. And that's what the street wants to see here. And I think what you're seeing is really a bifurcation in tech. It's kind of the haves and the have-nots. And that's really what's playing out across tech earnings season.
Welcome to Asking for a Trend. Breaking news. Apple earnings just now hitting the tape. And Yahoo Finance's Dan Howley is here with the numbers. Dan.
Yeah, Josh, big beat for Apple here on the top and bottom line. They said they recorded all-time record revenue for the iPhone, $85.3 billion. That's well ahead of the $78.3 billion that analysts were anticipating. The company saw $69.1 billion in the prior quarter. EPS came in at $2.84 on revenue of $143.8 billion. Analysts were anticipating $2.68 on $138.4 billion. So again, a big beat there. Services revenue was in line with expectations. And then we had Mac, iPad revenue at $8.4 billion and $8.6 billion respectively. Wearables came in at $11.4 billion. But one important aspect of this is greater China sales. Over the last 3 of 4 quarters, they had seen declines in that region. But now in this quarter, they had $25.5 billion in revenue. That's up nearly 38% year over year. So a big return to growth there out of China. This was something that Tim Cook had kind of telegraphed in the prior quarter earnings call, saying that they were expecting huge iPhone sales. Part of this has to do with kind of the lapping of people going out and purchasing tons of new smartphones during the COVID era. It's been 6 years now. People upgrade around that kind of time. The new iPhones, the 17, 17 Pro, they're interesting. They have slightly tweaked designs. I think it'll be interesting if we get any kind of color as to where the iPhone Air was in terms of sales. We have been hearing different inklings that perhaps sales volume of that particular model have been a little disappointing, and that a lot of people are flocking to the Pros and the standard iPhone 17. They don't really break those numbers down anymore, so we'll just have to wait and see. It also will be interesting to see what Tim Cook has to say about the recent tie-up with Google, where Apple and Google are going to be kind of combining with AI and having Google's Gemini power Apple's next-gen Siri.
Dan, let's just talk about this iPhone revenue number for a second, because this is still Apple's bread and butter, of course. This is blows past what the street was looking for. It clocks in around $85 billion. Analysts had penciled in closer to $78 billion. We knew going in here, Dan, that analysts had modeled that, listen, this iPhone 17 cycle has been strong. It's been solid. Why has it been solid, Dan? What's been driving that?
Yeah, I think it's that COVID kind of, timing, right? We'll probably see that throughout the next year, maybe 2, just because it's one of those things where people go out and buy. You don't buy a phone every 2 years now, right? You're not on a plan that lets you do that. So, you pay it off slowly over time, and then, maybe you just held on to it because you're like, well, I just paid off that part of the bill. Why do I want to tack something else on? And now you're probably thinking, all right, well, it's due. I'm several generations behind. I want to get the new hotness. I don't think anyone's going out to buy this because of Apple Intelligence. I don't think anyone's going to do that at any point unless this thing can, I could say, hey, Siri, get me tacos right now, and it personally delivers the tacos to my door. That's not happening. I think a lot of this has to do with the improved cameras, the improved screens. The battery life is a lot better. The slightly changed design, I think, piqued people's interest. If you look, you'll see a lot of people who have the new phones in that burnt orange color for the Pros. I think that got people pretty excited. And so that's where I think a lot of this came from, not necessarily, the fact that people are interested in iPhones again. It's just, I think that timing lines up. And, we saw that kind of with PCs this year, where PC sales in general were up 9% for 2025. It's that kind of lapping of the time frame where people go out and they say, okay, 5, 6, 7 years, that's where I need to go out and get a new device. TV sales might start to pick up soon too, because that's, another kind of device, but that's for another day.
Does it tell you anything too, Dan, just about how much time we spend talking about AI and consumer AI. But is this a window into how much does it really matter to a lot of consumers, whether it is a must-have feature or no? Right now, what consumers are focused on is listen, what they've always been focused on with iPhone at least, which is it's the processor, it's the battery, it's the camera.
Yeah, I've probably said this enough to be annoying, but I don't think that people are going out right now and saying, boy, I really need to buy a new iPhone for that Apple Intelligence. And I don't think people are going out and saying that with their Google phones or their Samsung phones. You know, a lot of people still use ChatGPT. Obviously, you can use that through the app. If you have a Samsung or Android phone, you can access Google's Gemini through their own individual app there. For Google's Pixel phones, it's built right in, right? So I don't think people are necessarily going out and saying, you know, I need to buy a new phone because of AI. They're going out and saying, I need a new phone because my battery sucks. They're going out and saying, I need a new phone because I want a better camera or the screen looks better. That's how people buy these devices. The software is the software. No one, when Siri came out, no one said, guys, let's talk to our phones like bozos, you know, in public for no reason and ask it to play a song and then have it fail 8 times. They said, no, let's go get a new phone because the camera's good, the battery's good. And that's exactly what I think happened here. It's a great device. They updated the software with the liquid glass display. Whether or not people like that or not, you know, that's up to them. But I think it's just a matter of the hardware being new and interesting again for the moment. Next year, we could have a foldable phone. That could even spark greater sales, although I'm kind of worried about the price tag on that.
Jay, it is good to see you. So listen, we have Apple's results. We don't have the guidance yet, Jay. As always, we'd expect executives on the call to offer some more color and commentary about what they see ahead. But give me your take on the quarter, Jay, and especially what you make of this iPhone revenue number, which easily beats the street. I mean, it came in, Jay, around 85 billion. The street was closer to around 78.
Yeah, so far so good. I mean, my basic thesis on Apple right now is very, very tactical in that the current cycle of phones, the current cycle of products looks really strong. People are buying those phones. Your previous guest was saying the same thing. People like the new phones, and sometimes it's as simple as that, right? I think the numbers look good, both in terms of top line for revenue, for iPhones, for China. China looked better than expected. And most importantly, for gross margins. The gross margins look really good this quarter, way above where I was expecting them.
I do want to talk about AI for a second here, though, Jay, because we know, listen, we heard Apple's going to use Google's Gemini models to power its AI efforts. That's going to include a more personalized Siri. I'm just curious what you make of that, Jay. What kind of impact you think that could have on the next iPhone upgrade cycle, in your opinion?
So I think ultimately AI is an existential threat for Apple. They need to get it right. But the good news is that they have time to do that. They don't need their own model today. They are in a good place working with Google, working with some of the other companies to sort of exist on the platform. You know, Siri just isn't all that, right? It's not that exciting. It doesn't do that much, and it could use for, you know, people want better experience now. Though they're used to what ChatGPT or Claude has to offer, and having Google behind them should get Siri to someplace that's at least functional and useful, and give Apple time to sort out its own house and get its own AI team to where it needs to be.
Jay, you mentioned margins. Let's stay on that for a second, because that was a big topic of debate heading into this print. A lot of your colleagues on the street were writing about this, and specifically the rising memory cost, Jay, and they're wondering, okay, they're trying to game out and model what could that mean actually for Apple's pricing and margins in the quarters ahead. How do you see it, Jay? What levers does Tim Cook have to pull on that?
So it's a big question. It's why I'm really waiting to hear what they have for the guide. That's going to be critical. They did get asked about memory prices on their last earnings call a quarter ago, and they said that they had put in place long-term agreements with the memory vendors that sort of lock up pricing for some long period of time. Since then, spot prices for memory have just kept going up and up and up. And eventually contract prices will converge with spot prices. And so that's a sort of ongoing risk this year, looking at where they're going to see, are they going to keep to that story that they have these long-term price agreements in place? It's really important for Apple, especially on the margin front. They make a lot of memory from memory, right? When you buy an iPhone, you pay an extra $100 to get another whatever amount of RAM or flash. That has a lot of margin baked into it. It doesn't cost them $100 to do that. And so what are they going to do sort of with those price increases? Are they going to make the consumer eat them? Are they going to, fit it into their own gross margins? we don't know. The guy's going to tell us a lot, and I think that plays out later in the year when we get what is probably going to be a folding phone. That's going to be pretty expensive. How much elasticity is there for demand? Are consumers going to pay big numbers for that? That may save them in the end.
What about Greater China, Jay? That's another important data point I just want to run by you. Q1 Greater China revenue, 25.5 billion. That was a beat. Your colleagues on the street, the estimate consensus, Jay, was more like 21.8. What do you make of that number? How do you see business for Apple in China kind of evolving from here?
I think Apple is in this weird place where it has to walk this very fine line. Like, they're very dependent on China, both the market and for their manufacturing base. They're probably too dependent for their own good. So they have to walk this fine line between, Tim Cook going to see the president every occasion and saying all the right things in China. So far, they've maintained that. I think the fact that they're doing well in China, as we see a lot of changes taking place in the Chinese smartphone market, prices are coming down for all their competitors there. Apple's doing really well. It's a good sign. Like, consumers in China still like Apple. They still like the brand, and I think that will carry the weight for at least for the time being.
Jay, great to have you on the show today. Appreciate that analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.